Hi.
Hello. Maybe just give it one more minute so everybody joins.
Hello.
Hello. All right, let's start. Happy Wednesday, everybody. This is database office hours. And I'm kicking it off with something Andy created. We also talked about it last week. And that's about a typecast helper. So the background is that suppose you would like to change a column type from text to JSONB. That was the example that we discussed. You basically have the option to go to the application and iterate all the records, translate them to JSON, and then one by one update records to store them in JSON. And what Andy did was implementing a typecast function so that this operation basically can happen inside the database. So you can, instead of loading all the records into the application, you can now truly batch the operation in the database, and you basically perform the typecasting inside the database. And there are also options to handle errors in this case. So what do you do with any like invalid data? And you can even go ahead and implement a custom cast function and basically try to convert to JSON. And if it's not a valid JSON, do something else, provide a default value or something like that. So that's a very flexible approach. And yeah, it's nice to see that we can do those things in the database fully. Any thoughts or comments about that? But I know we talked about it last week already. Just wanted to bring it up and tell everybody that's ready to be used. Right, then let's move on to renaming columns.
Yeah, so this issue was coming up on the version app because there are some restrictions about how long a deployment can take. And I had an idea about using views to rename a column. So basically, when we kick off a deployment, we create a view similar to the existing table structure. And in that particular view, we make sure that both columns are present and defined. And we replace the model, the table name in the model. So every writes, every select will hit our database view. And at some point, we can actually change the column name without breaking the application in a post-migration. And in the next release, we can just simply eliminate the view. There are some, so I tested it locally and it seems to be working. There are some limitations, of course. So this relies on the fact that you can define the table name in your active record model, well, basically in the class definition. As soon as you start writing a pure SQL query where you reference the, let's say, the projects table, it will break simply because you are not using the standard, like the table name method, because you basically hard code your table name. Yeah, there were like other issues when you create a database view from an existing table and inspect the view, the default values and like some other settings on the table are not reflected in the view. So maybe you say not null for a particular column, but in the view it will be nullable, and it's like a bug, or Postgres just decided not to implement this feature. we also have to, so to solve this, we also have to hack into Rails a bit to get the column definition from the original table and make it available in the not newly defined model, but in the model. It's a bit tricky, but it seems to be working. And I was able to rename the project name locally, and most of the tests were passing. So it's kind of working. And yeah, most of the failures were coming from these problems I mentioned earlier, but some of them can be solved. Probably if we take this approach, we are not going to rename things in the projects table because it's probably our biggest model. It references a lot of things, and we have 100 different kinds of queries querying the projects table. But if there is a kind of standalone model, database table, where we need to rename something, and we know that we use standard active record stuff or RL, then this can be a viable approach, I think.
It's a nice approach. Am I right to think that the biggest benefit from that is that you don't have to rewrite the table, or basically what we're doing now is basically adding a new column and then filling that column up, so that's basically rewriting the whole table. And with that approach, you don't need that, right?
Yeah, and this basically instant. As soon as you get the exclusive lock on the table to rename the column, it will just happen. So there is no extra I/O that we need to do to rename the table.
Mm-hmm. For the custom SQLs, it might be nice if we were using the table name from the model everywhere, but I don't think we currently are, right? So we do have some custom SQL that doesn't.
Yeah, we have actually for projects related queries, we have actually guidelines how do you reference like properly the column names if you do a custom select. But yeah, we have some legacy stuff in the code base and custom queries. Yeah, it would be quite a bit of work to make this working for all our models, because we have to look into the queries and refactor that to pick up the table name properly. But I mean, it would be pretty easy to check if it's possible, because as soon as you change the table name, you will start seeing failures on the CI.
Mm-hmm. And we're still working with the same data anyways. Like, this is just a separate view for the same data. So
it just adds an extra column, which doesn't really affect anything.
So do we have a standard going forward that we try to stay out of pure SQL if possible? Because that, of course, as you mentioned, is a case where this might fall apart.
So we can still go pure SQL, but we need to follow a few guidelines. So you cannot just say select from projects, but you need to actually say select from project.table name, because we might alter the table name.
You have to hook into AREL or specify the table, the actual view you're adding there, right?
That's actually, we have a helper method for that. So there is a standard method to get the current table name, what we are querying. So it's either the view or the table. So this is just a matter of, I don't know if we can create a Robocop rule for this to check it, but it's doable. And if I'm mostly thinking about the version app, I don't know the code base 100%, but that there could be, we could probably try this method there.
Yeah, yeah, that was on, I think it was my merge request. And I think it would be a good, I ended up closing that merge request, but I think there's going to be a larger schema rewrite of that table soon. And I think it may be a perfect solution for that case.
Yeah, there is one issue though. I'm not sure it's a big deal, but GitLab application uses a schema which is based on SQL. So we don't have the schema RB, but we have the structure.sql. And I think the version app is still using the schema RB.
So that in turn means you can't use views on that because they don't persist in the schema RB file, right?
Yeah. So we can switch to structure.sql or create a seed script that ensures that the view is created when you basically run the tests and set up your development environment.
Right. I think the Heroku build pack now does a RakeDB migrate afterwards, after it loads the schema in. So I think would that solve that condition?
Not quite, because I mean, you mean for testing or?
Right, to ensure that the view is properly defined in the database. If it was in your database migration during CI, that would take care of it, right?
Yeah, but that's the problem, that if you run the migration, then the schema version will be bumped, and the first step is loading the schema into the database. And if the schema version is larger than the migration that adds the view, then that view basically lost. So we'll need an extra step that creates this view all the time when you initialize your database. Or sorry, yeah.
Just wanted to rephrase that. So you can think of the schema RB file or the structure SQL file as basically capturing the latest state of your database schema. And any migrations, so if you run migrations on a empty database, you basically end up in that state of structure SQL or schema RB. But when you load schema RB or structure SQL, you don't have any pending migrations because of that. So that's why you wouldn't get the view, because that migration looks like it executed already.
Okay, I gotcha.
We can also think about introducing the structure.sql. I don't know how, it's a smaller app than GitLab.com,
yeah,
so
that's what I was going towards, was the structure.sql isn't a common paradigm for most Rails developers, so it's a bit of a more of a cognitive load, I think, on people who aren't as familiar with database schemas. So that's just my caveat or fear there.
Yeah, it's a bit more verbose than the Rails schema for sure. On the other hand, you know for sure what is inside the database, and you can work with more advanced stuff that Rails supports, because what Rails tries to do is basically supporting all the different database systems like MySQL and Postgres and all that. But you end up with a very small subset of what you can actually leverage in Postgres because of that. And with Structure SQL, you're basically free to use any of those features.
Yeah, there might be also a gem that adds support persisting a view in the schema file. I'm pretty sure there are some, but yeah, I don't know. I think we already have some experience transforming the schema.rb to structure.sql, so we can leverage that and make the switch if we think it's worth it.
So why is this coming up in the versions app? Or why do we have, why can't we use the, I mean, that's a nice approach anyways, and should probably think about that for GitLab too. But is there a specific reason why we need to do it differently in the version app than we do it with the GitLab helper?
So you're referring to a rename of a column, right?
Right.
Okay. So the rename of column in this case was on a JSON column, and there were a few references to it in the code that we were afraid would be broken during that process. And this, I believe, was what Adam was bringing up as a suggested alternative to help cure that issue. Am I saying that correctly, Adam?
Yeah, and there was something else about the time we can spend to run the migrations. I think there is a time limit.
Right. We have a current 300-second timeout from auto DevOps in the Helm command, and that causes the deployment process to fail, but not the migrations. The migrations will keep going, but since they take more than 300 seconds, it'll consider the deployment failed and not push out the code past running migrations. So we're trying to figure that out on a separate issue. So even if we put things into the background, if we spend a lot of time putting things into the background, it still hits that timeout. And so that was an issue for us.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So you would benefit from that new approach because you don't have to rewrite data, and that's basically instant, creating those views, flipping them around. That makes sense. All right, should we move on to denormalized table, Adam?
Yeah. So next one is also mine. So I'm thinking about creating a new table. We'll need it for a new feature, and the table will be connected to merge requests, but the data will be queried mostly on the root namespace level. So I'm thinking about adding a root namespace ID to the table to make the querying of the data a bit easier. Basically, I don't have to run this recursive finder on the namespaces. But I remember there was like a catch when a group ownership or a group was moved somewhere, and that might change the root namespace. I don't remember exactly. Maybe someone knows.
So this would live on a table that relates to merge requests rather than project itself, right? Because we already have a projects table, it already has a namespace ID. It could have a root namespace ID, but that's not what we want here, right?
You mean on the merge requests on a new, No, it would be a completely new table. I want to capture a few metrics, and that's why I need to associate it with merge request. And I was thinking about, when I query the data for the root namespace, it would be nice to just query one value because I know the root namespace ID, and then I can easily get the records without doing the recursive check.
How does it relate to, so that there is work going on to add the root namespace ID, I believe, to the projects table, and it feels a bit similar in that regard, right? Could you leverage that as well? So you didn't have to maintain that root namespace information on the merge request side?
So if we have the root namespace on the projects table, then I still have to join them, right? So I will
Right.
still have a large list of projects and then filter the merge requests, right? If I want to join them. So it's not like a recursive lookup, but it's like
right. So there is, I think, 2 changes in flight regarding this, because this is such a typical problem that we have very expensive queries because of this recursive namespace hierarchy going on. And the 2 changes I think we're thinking about to make is adding the root namespace ID to the projects table, which is a denormalization. So you have to take care of that when you move projects, for example. But then you really have an easy way to select all the projects for a particular root namespace. And the second thing we're about to add is basically the path to the root namespace from a certain project. So you have this hierarchy, it's a tree, and any project would have the information like what is the path back to the root namespace with all the intermediate groups and namespaces in there. And that should help to alleviate those pains from the recursive queries.
Yes, that would help quite a bit, but maybe I'm trying to come up with the most performance solution, because if you have one value, you can easily have an order based on the index, right? So if you have multiple, let's say, project IDs, you can easily get all the projects within your groups and subgroup because you denormalize the projects table. That's fine. But if you join another table, let's say you look into merge requests, you still have to find that n project IDs, collect all the merge requests, and do a sorting by something. And basically the sort cannot be supported by an index because you have too many project IDs.
That's a good point, yeah. And the drawback is from the denormalization, you would have to take care of that information in the root namespace column. So if things change, you also have to update it.
Yeah.
That's a good point. We've had a similar discussion recently where we were thinking about adding statistics somewhere. I don't recall where, but let's say the issues table. And then we wanted to add another metric to an issue. And the question was whether or not you add it to the issues table or you put it into a separate table so that the issues table doesn't get as wide. And the argument was similar in that case, where we wanted to be able to sort by that metric and to also filter on the issues table. And now if you put those things on like 2 different tables, even though you can join them, it's not ideal because you will have to either use an index for the filter or for the ordering, but you can't combine the 2 of them. But if you put it on the same table, you actually can do that. So that was kind of a similar argument we were making there, to not extract it into a separate table.
I see, but I don't want to take this discussion really long, but I don't really have a problem with the approach you mentioned, but at some point later we might see a really high cost for sorting, because at some point the data that we try to sort is not going to fit into the memory. Maybe some of the issue-able finders, we already hit this limit. I'm not sure, because the sort, we don't get sorted results from the index, right? We have to first collect all the data and then sort in memory or with the help of the disk. And that at some point can...
It depends on the index that you have. You can use an index to support sorting. So for example, if you have an index on created at or so, and you come in with a query order by created at limit 10, let's say, so top 10 by created at, you can actually go to the index and just look at the first 10 records because the index is sorted on disk and you don't have to sort at all in memory, right?
Yeah, I get that. But as soon as you have like a project ID filter, this is not going to work so well because you have to look up the index until you find that those particular project IDs.
Right. So in this case, you benefit from an index that has both the ordering column and the project ID.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why it makes sense to put that on the same table. Basically.
Yeah. But in an unfortunate scenario where for a long time you don't have those project IDs, let's say you stopped working on them, and if you go by this created at index, it has to scan a lot of data in the index until we find that particular project ID. So if your first column is created at,
and you're looking for only a particular project, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So you would have to have it the other way around: project ID first, and then the created at if you come in by that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see a need for root namespace information for quite a few tables if we wanted to follow that idea.
Yeah.
And that is something that we have to maintain as well. So it comes at that cost, basically, right?
So do you know if currently the root namespace can be changed or not?
I think you can move a project across root namespaces.
Okay.
I don't know how often that happens though on our site, for example.
Yeah, so I guess we at some point, if you have too many tables with root namespace, we will have to do some kind of background processing to move stuff around. Okay. Cool. Thanks.
Sure. All right. I just wanted to ask about the Postgres AI evaluation that's going on. So we're basically, if you're not familiar with that, we're basically testing a tool that is quite similar to Database Labs on Slack, but it's a full-blown product. We're just evaluating this. So I was kind of curious to see if there was any feedback or thoughts on that. Have you been using it? What worked? What didn't work? Is it better than what we have on Slack? Any of these kinds? And we can talk about it here. And there's also a question on the issue that I linked where you can leave feedback if you want. So has anybody had a chance to use it already?
I used the UI. It was pretty nice because there was less noise than the Slack channel when many people are using at the same time. But I still want to like hook up or have a local PSQL session that talks to the real database in Postgres AI, so I can test a few migrations. That would be nice.
That's a really nice feature, and I think we're short before setting up the access keys for that. Hope that resolves soon. But basically, it's a really nice workflow. You have a CLI tool which you can use to trigger a database clone. Maybe takes half a minute or so. You set up port forwarding, and you're good to go with the pSQL console. You have read-write access. You have all the production data in there. You can mess with that just like you want to, and then you throw away the clone afterwards. So that's a really nice thing.
Can you also connect it to Rails to have like a Rails console using that database?
You can. It's really just you port forward the Postgres port to your local machine, and you can do with that what you like to. Although there are concerns around that where we are still discussing what the security implications of that is, because you would basically hook up your local development environment with the production database, and that might have like unintended outcomes, to put it that way. But yes, this is very easy to do. At this point, I wouldn't recommend doing it until we figure out what the security concerns are and how we address those. So just thinking about like, well, is this, it's easily imaginable that this sends out emails to customers, for example. It probably doesn't, but it could easily happen, something like that. And we should figure that out before we do it. And there are also discussions and ideas around testing those migrations in a more automated fashion. We just discussed with Nikolai. You could have a CI job that you can trigger on a GitLab build. Basically, grabs a new clone from the database, boots up an instance, grabs your MR, runs the migrations, and basically leaves you with a cloned instance of the database that has the new migrations executed, and you can log into pSQL to check that, or you're getting back results from the CI job, like how long did it take, maybe information about the logs that were acquired and all that, and that all from a CI job. And I imagine that'd be really nice to have. Cool. If you have further feedback, feel free to leave that on the issue, please, so we can have a summary of those. Alina, would you like to continue?
Yes, sure. Thank you. So I think we've talked here maybe some time ago about the telemetry reviews. Part of those reviews is also checking query performance and query generated possible optimizations. This is still part right now from the telemetry review. We were suggesting that this could be moved in database reviews. Now in this MR, there will be considered by a danger roulette. So possibly after this MR gets merged, these reviews will fall back in database review. Trying there, if you have any feedback there, please add it to the MR. What is done there is try to only reduce the changes on specific count or distinct count. So not any change in those usage data files will be detected as marked as database changes, but only specific changes. So if you have any feedback there, please let me know. Also, after this comes up, if there are any issues. I think that's it. If you have questions.
Sorry, just still reading the MR. Was there some specific telemetry review we were doing on those before?
Yes, we're doing that, these reviews now. So if right now the telemetry danger is looking for any changes in usage data files. Sometimes are involving query changes, sometimes don't. But we were doing, and we are doing right now, all that. Sometimes we also involve database team when we're stuck, especially. But yeah, we were doing that outside the roulette somehow. So we just add the table, the labels, the telemetry labels, and the mentions to our telemetry group, and we were doing the reviews like that. the goal is to move these specialized telemetry reviews to backend and database, well, as much as possible, so we don't have this specialized telemetry review.
That makes sense. Was there
Also
something? Sorry, go ahead.
No, I wanted to mention that they also trying to work on some Robocop rules to get more help in automatize or everything that we can there. I don't know, some other things that we're looking during the telemetry reviews.
Is there something, are you looking for something specific when you look at it from a telemetry angle, or is it similar to common database reviews?
When there are database changes or query changes, we're looking to have the MR descriptions with the query plans, the query generated, the times. We are looking to have the queries under 1 second, query times under 1 second, and check for possible optimizations. So I think this is really similar with what we're reading in database review. Generally in these files, we're using the batch counters. So maybe this is something more specific here. Maybe this could be something that we could add or as a note in database review docs, if you consider it's good. Like the use of batch counters.
Is this similar to the type of review that's automatically triggered if something's underneath the finders directory, you would think?
Yeah, I think we also do database reviews for finders, which is sometimes applicable and sometimes there is no database relevant change.
Right. So I think that'd be similar to this then. And there is some caveats. I think there's a lot of things that we only allow being called from the models are called in this one, in these files, kind of the where we usually ask for scopes. This one goes straight to active record instead.
Some other things that we're looking is maybe more specific to telemetry regarding specific counters, maybe some documentation for metrics definition, if the counter, the position and the level of the metric, if it needs to be added in version up or not. But that's not related to database. If you see any possible issues here or if you have concerns.
Perhaps it makes, so if there is like specifics that you're looking at, sounds like that, maybe it makes sense to add it to the documentation to point out what to look for if that's different than general database reviews. But it sounds similar, but maybe there is some specifics you want to point out.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the batch counting. I'm not sure how this was handled before in database review, if you encounter these situations.
I think the one thing I've noticed when looking at the usage data file here is the abstraction of count and distinct count may be hard to first understand when glancing at it. So maybe that'd be good to point out that a review of that should be made. A familiarity of that should be considered when reviewing.
Okay. We were discussing these days also about extending a bit that part and having something like batch operations, or besides count and distinct count, having some batch sum and batch average operations. So maybe it could be useful to add it in database review as some documentation. Is that the right place then?
Yeah, that sounds like a good start.
Okay.
Perhaps if needed, you can also maybe expand a little on the background why we're doing it in that way. Do we have any other place where we talk about usage data in the documentation, or why we're doing it in that way?
We have the telemetry guide. I can point out the link to that. Second.
Yeah, perhaps adding a link to that already helps.
Okay. So then I'm going to point a link from database review, maybe to this part.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good. All right, any other thoughts on that? If not, I have a quick ad hoc question that was just coming up. So we are working with different database schemas at the moment, right? So we used to have only one, but we added 2 more for partitioning. And a question that came up in that regard was, do we actually support or allow self-hosted installations that run their own Postgres to install GitLab in a schema that is not the public schema? So basically, you know, maybe you create a GitLab schema or so, and you install GitLab in that schema. Is that something that we allow? Has anybody seen that? I've been looking for documentation on that end, but haven't found anything. And apparently there is one customer that we have that has it in that way, so and struggles with database migrations at the moment. That's why I'm asking.
I don't think we prefix our queries with schema right now, right? So I think if you don't prefix, does it default to public? Because then I'm not sure how that would work.
That's right. So basically, whenever you work with regular tables, you don't prefix them, and you basically get the default schema. And typically that's public, but it can be anything basically. So you have this search path setting that you can control for your session that basically tells you what the default schema is. Typically that's public, but it can be something else. So you could think that, well, I create a GitLab schema and I always configure my GitLab database user such that the search path is not public, but it's prefixed with GitLab basically. So that could work
that makes sense.
At the moment.
So what goes wrong in the migrations? What's different?
So right now, since we added more schemas to the structure SQL for partitioning, the structure SQL changed so that it basically is more explicit about the default schema. So it basically, when it creates regular tables, it started to prefix them with public, right? And presumably that works for most of the installations, unless you want that to go into a separate schema or a different schema than public. And in this case, it's a bit more strange because they happen to run into that when they upgrade from one release to the other, where I think there should be no problem at all because structure SQL is not really involved in that. We only use that to create to bootstrap new installations, but as soon as you have one and you upgrade that, it's only about database migrations. So I'm not entirely sure why that happens for them, but it raises the question, like, do we want to support installations in different default schemas, or can we assume public safely? So that's an open question, sort of.
When we dump the schema, can we say that skip the schema in the dump so we don't see public everywhere?
Yes, we would have to sort of do that manually, but we already do something like that in Rails. So we basically dump the schema using pgdump, and then we do some post-processing. So we could remove that. The reason why it's added is that we are explicitly dumping those additional schemas that we add. So before we had only one schema anyway, so there was no need, and pgdump didn't explicitly add those schema prefixes. But as soon as you have two, pgdump is more explicit about that, and it also adds the default schema to the table names. But we could have some post-processing, removing the public prefix from everything. I will just find the issue relating to that, and if you have more thoughts on that, please take a look at there. Cool. Any other topics we should cover today? And if not, that nicely lines up with time as well. So thanks everybody for the nice conversation today. Really appreciate it. And have a nice day.
Bye.
Cheers.